Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast with Allison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen. Good morning, Allison.
Hey, good afternoon.
All of a sudden,
Almost good evening.
I couldn't remember if I was opening this up or not.
Nor could I. I was too busy staring at my device thinking, is it working? Is it not working?
Okay,
And I
see,
thought,
this
oh,
is
no
why
one
they're
said
bad.
anything.
Is it working?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay,
It's
good.
working. I hope so.
Well. Hello. And welcome back to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast. Okay,
Yes.
Allison, before we start, let's say thank you to our newest patron.
Yes, exactly. Kathy from Homespun Seasonal Living. That's what her website's called. And she's on IG as that tag as well, who joined us at the end of last month, who's in the States, along with you, and who's has got a wealth of experience and knowledge, and who's told me she's smitten with the podcast, which made me smile. It's such a lovely word and such a lovely thought that someone likes listening to us. So welcome, Kathy. Thank you very much for supporting us. We really appreciate it, and it helps.
She has a beautiful Instagram feed. I love seeing, I followed her because I wanted to see her stuff pop up in my feed, and it's so cool, the things she's doing.
Yeah.
And she's in a similar climate to mine, so I'm going to be able to learn a lot from what she's doing.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I don't know if we've talked about Rebecca on the
yes,
main feed as well, the patron before Kathy. She's in a completely different part of the world, Australia.
Yeah.
And maybe we mentioned her before. She came on board just before last year closed. I'm not sure whether we said hello to her on the main podcast, but hello if we didn't, Rebecca, in Australia. And yeah, thanks to you as well. Thank you to all of the patrons who continue to support us as we carry on putting out episodes and doing research and finding wonderful stuff to talk about. We really appreciate it.
Every day, I feel like I'm learning something new that is impressing upon me even more the importance of everything that we're talking about and all the 1,000 sort of attached subjects that go along with ancestral food. And every time it makes me again grateful for the patrons who also see that and who are making it possible for us to talk about this and sponsoring this podcast out into the world.
Yeah, thank you.
And keeping us ad free.
Yeah, exactly.
So
thank you.
Before we start talking about food, let's talk about some food. So, Alice, what did you have for lunch? Or have you had dinner? I'm trying to remember what time it is for you.
Yeah, no, I haven't had dinner. I will be having dinner after we've recorded.
Slightly different recording time for us.
Yeah, I had lunch, which seems like a long time ago now, but I had pulses, split peas. I've been having lentils quite a lot recently, which I know people have heard on the podcast, and some people have cooked them the way I do, which is really nice. But I had split peas today. That when I went to buy some more lentils from the bulk store, the lentils were substantially more expensive than the split peas. So I went with the split peas. Both of the choices have the hulls, the shells taken off, because we always find those the hardest to digest. So I tried to go for pulses that have already had those shells taken off. So split peas, which I cooked in my usual kind of spicy way with oil in the bottom of the pan, and then I put in nigella and turmeric. I was kind of in a nigella and turmeric mood. And put the onion in, red onion, and 2 whopping cloves of garlic, really big. And then poured the split peas in, stirred them around. And then I got my swats, which is the liquid left over from the oat fermentation called suans that I do. And I put in probably 3/4 of the liquid I used was that liquid, and then a little bit of water. Cooked them for around 2.5 hours, something like that.
Nice.
And we had those with broccoli and Brussels from the local market. And then we had a bread which was made yesterday with leftover rye grains from the Ancestral ale that I make. So it was rye grains which had been in a ferment making our ale for 2 days.
Ooh, yum.
But I mixed it with spelt that Rob ground on our hand crank grinder. So it was quite coarse. Our grinder isn't an electric one, so it doesn't grind finely like, some of the electric grinders do. And I decided just to throw some more things in there. And when I was eating it today, I thought about the Ancestral Kitchen Challenge, the one that is find a bread that works for you and your family. Right. And it seemed to be an example of that, because I also threw in some linseed, because I like linseed in bread and I thought it would help bind it. And then I had some leftover porridge that had been in the fridge fermenting for a week. I'd cooked it, but I cooked a lot. And I just put some of that in it as well. Ooh. And, it didn't come out looking like a bread that, was from a book with a, really thick brown crust that cracked and, big air bubbles in it. It just looked like a nice bread. It smelled wonderful. But it didn't have sourdough starter in it because it used the yeasts from the beer to rise. But it smelled, kind of had a smell a bit like the beer, which was nice.
Oh, that is nice.
And it just had a bit of everything in, and it was dense and really nutritious. And obviously it's a circular thing because I'm reusing the grains. And it feels like it's a bread that works for our family. It uses up that rye grain. It has a spelt grain in it that's coarsely ground, and it has some leftover breakfast in. And I feel like, everyone who wants to aesthetically look good is telling us we have to have our breads looking a certain way. And no, it's rubbish. We just need to have a bread that works for us, like that prompt in the Ancestral Kitchen Challenge says. So that was our bread. I spread it with lard, which we rendered. And then we had some of the beer, which was really nice.
I feel like I'm just sitting here thinking about all the things I've been reading over the past week. In my mind, I've been reading Katie Bowman and Chewing the Fat. Oh, okay. You did. I've got a little one sitting on my lap.
Hello.
So I'm just thinking about how if the bread you ate, that loaf you just described was, the common one in the region and everybody liked it, then when you transitioned into industrial agriculture and then into industrial food manufacturing, how easily we would manufacture, let's make the flavor of the beer and the smell. And by, like we talked about in the bread episode, after a while, it would be so distant in terms of generations that we wouldn't even actually remember what it smelled like originally or tasted like. And maybe great grandma would say, that's not the right thing. Doesn't smell right. Doesn't taste right. But we would say, why are you talking about, grandma? It's fine, And Katie Bowman's book has me thinking about that in what she calls nutritional movement ways too, where, you would probably have been kneeling at a stone grinder grinding for a very long time. And Rob maybe would have been walking miles and miles to gather the grain. And Gabriel probably would have been sitting on the floor picking out bugs and husks and stones and things for you, And then you would have been throwing grain up in the air and, lots and lots of movements. And then we'll remove you from that environment and we'll create an industrial version where we'll say, turn on this video and then turn, now stand, now sit, now turn, now stand, and create our own manufactured movements. I don't know.
I totally agree. And both of those books together are an interesting parallel because
true.
It seems like a lot of those women in their 90s were extraordinarily healthy compared to
and fit
people that I know in my people in my kind of tradition that are in their 90s. And it seemed to me quite obvious from Karima Moyanoki's book we're talking about that they'd worked in the fields all their life.
Yes.
Right up, before, until the 70s, they were working it just to live. And, they were sleeping in cold barns, but they were out there all the time. And then since then, they've all got autos, they've all got gardens and they're all growing their own produce still. And it's that movement, which, as Katie Bowman explains in her books, it is normal. That's what we grew up doing,
It's what we're capable of.
whether, before agriculture, we were out running and walking to track animals. We were out foraging and hunting, bending down and doing this movement. It's what we can do. And when we exploit our bodies to their fullest to do that, that pays us back. But, obviously, life was hard for the women in Karima's book. They didn't have enough food, the majority of them, but still working with what we're intended to do as humans rather than willfully ignoring it and doing something that is sitting at a desk is such a benefit to us.
Right.
Even if we don't do it all the time, if we can bring it into our lives, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And she's really had me thinking, just because she's talking about all the movements and things. And so it's making me think about how an ancestral food lifestyle will start with, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be eating lard, not margarine. And then it will eventually move to, either Allison hiking to a farm to get the lard, or, going outside every single day and feeding your pig, and then using your strength to hoist it and shave it and prepare it and stir the lard. And, so bringing back not just the ancestral food itself, but the actual ancestral movements involved in procuring and gathering and preparing the food, I think is going to be pretty critical, because you can't just sit and eat buckets of lard, obviously, and not do a little, hunting and gathering to counter it.
Yeah, completely. Are you reading Move Your DNA, Katie's book?
I think that's the one I'm on right now. I have 3 of her books. Yeah. But no, I think that is the one I'm on. So
Naomi introduced me to her, who we interviewed for the Slovakian food. She introduced me to Katie Bowman originally. What I find quite interesting is that some of us have kind of historic problems with our bodies based on the way we've lived in the past. Or maybe let's just talk about me, shall we? Because I can't talk for everyone. But I know other people have talked to me about it. In that I'm hypermobile, so my joints move around more than most because I have a kind of issue with my collagen in my ligaments. And because of that, and the interaction of how I emotionally dealt with stuff when I was a kid and how I held my body, it has meant that I've got 40 years of using my body in an incorrect way to try to tease out and change and work with the emotions that are so deeply embedded in my tissues. So when I react to any, negative thing that happens in the day, I don't react and push my body back into that position. And so for me, it's interesting the kind of the line between, well, this is what I can actually do, and how can I move that forward gently without hurting myself in the process. And because if I just did something like, carrying a great big heavy thing, then I'd hurt myself quite badly and I wouldn't recover. But there are things that I can do that will move me into a space where my body's changing. And that line is delicate. And for people who I think have bodies that aren't historically so reliable, it's dangerous. Sometimes it's a scary line, because if you hurt yourself, it really hurts.
Yeah, that's definitely an important thing. I think both with ancestral food and with, I'll just call it ancestral movement for lack of a better term, which is that if you make the all or nothing switch all of a sudden, so you go from a completely industrial lifestyle to, sedentary industrial, all the things, and then just jump straight over, it would be a shock to the system.
Yeah.
Maybe
it's
not all positive.
Like you said, it's the same with food. If you suddenly change and take all the processed food out of your body, or you suddenly decide to change, then you're going to have a detox.
Right.
So it's kind of like you said, I find that interesting.
It's kind of crazy really thinking that you had hypermobility and you were a raw vegan on top of that. That seems like a bad combo.
Yeah, well, we learn, don't we, and there are good things about being raw vegan for a short period of time for me.
Yeah.
And certainly that time accelerated my learning about food for sure. We each have our journeys, don't we? And every part of them is kind of part of the whole where we end up in the present. So yeah.
I mean, I look back at all the dietary choices that I made, and some of them weren't good in terms of they were overly restrictive and things like that. And I I don't yes, it would be nice to have always made the perfect choices, but at the same time, I can't totally say that I regret it because
Yeah.
I've practically learned a lot from
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah.
I've learned what literally does not work in the long term.
Yeah. I think sometimes that's the only way you can learn properly, you know.
Oh, well,
I
me
went
for
and I worked for
sure.
Microsoft and I had lots of money and I had a BMW and I had a life where I could go on holiday, and it was only through doing that that I was able to learn that I so did not want that, and it was not for me. And I've always been the sort of person that throws myself into these things and then goes, hang on a minute, I've learned from that.
Yeah.
Now I'll just make this radical shift over in this direction off to the left, shall I?
Yep,
Which is
that's you.
sometimes looks a bit funny to the outsider, or frustrating to someone who's not inclined to do that in their life. But really, it's a way we can really learn because we've experienced it and we know what it's like, and therefore our values and our kind of our why behind what we're doing now is so much stronger.
And anyone who needs to see an illustration of what Allison's talking about, go back and listen to the Meet Allison episode.
That was a
You'll
long time
say,
ago.
oh my goodness, I see what she's talking about. Okay, let me tell you what I had for breakfast, and then we can dive into
Please do.
more food topics. So it was very boring. I feel quite boring next to you. I guess I could get really fancy about it though. So I'll try to make this sound really good. All right.
Okay.
Our friends butchered a pig.
Wow.
Well, we helped them. So they did the butcher and the slaughter. Like, I guess, okay, I don't even know what I just said. They killed the pig. We took it home and cut it up. That's what I'm trying to say. So then, of course, all those bones, I made big packages that say meaty pork bones, and they're very meaty. So because I'm not very good at trimming yet. So all those meaty bones, every once in a while I pull some out and make pork broth, and it's so good and just flavorful. So I took some of that. See, I'm trying to make it sound more interesting than just 2-ingredient breakfast.
Oh, it sounds lovely.
So,
I haven't made pork broth since we were in England, I don't think.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I'm kind of a
It's
bit
good.
jealous.
It's good. So I made a bowl of the pork broth with some salt, and then I poached some eggs in it from our chickens, and that was my breakfast.
Yum.
It was good.
It sounds lovely.
Can't compete with beer bread, though.
Really, really nice. What knife do you use to butcher with?
Well, there's a few that I like. One is called a breaking knife, and it's a big, long, kind of like a scimitar sort of a knife. That one is great. Then I have 2 different boning knives. One's the fish boning knife that's, you know what, we need to ask Aaron what he might know better. I might be using the wrong names, but one's a really flexible boning knife. And you can do so much with that knife. And then the other one's a smaller, hard boning knife. I never thought that boning knives were firm like this, but this is what it's supposedly called.
Okay.
And that has become our favorite knife for literally everything in the house. And then, of all things, I also use, in some instances, an offset bread knife. And then there's about, I'm trying to think, when you're breaking up the entire pig, if the head is already off, then there's about 4, I think, times where you would need to use a bone saw. And this is an interesting aspect of bringing ancestral movement back, in that, so the most premier way is to cut as much of the flesh as close as you can, and then use leverage in the joints to not ever have to use the saw as much as possible. But when I'm cutting some specific pieces, I need them a little bit smaller to make them fit what I'm doing. And traditionally you would do this too. I don't think really anybody leaves them like the entire spine together or something. But then you would cut the flesh as close as you can, and then very carefully and slowly use the bone saw, get really close, and then use the weight of the meat again to leverage it and pop the rest of it apart. And popularly, you'll use like an electric saw, but that creates some friction in the meat, which creates heat. And then it also shatters tiny bone fragments and propels them into the meat. So then you have another, quality problem. So again, going back to using more of like for me, depending on the size of the pig, like I have to use my entire body to move the piece. It can be heavy, but it's good because it's movement paired with,
And are you doing that with Gary or just you?
We've done it. I did one on my own and he did one on his own. Just because of the way
and you've got a big work surface for it. You've obviously got a huge space to lay this out on.
Yeah, we did it on like a folding table on a deck. So just like a plastic table.
Okay.
And then when I did the first pig, it was a really big one. And then a friend came and helped for the second half, but Gary had to work that day, so he wasn't there for that. And then when he did the second pig, and I think I prefer it this way, he was working on cutting up the pieces while I was inside working on taking care of all the bits. So like I could go, you know what I mean? Like there's so much processing that needs to be done. It's hard when you're doing all the cutting and there's nobody running like interference with the kids, meals for you and the kids, or pick up and the constant cleanup that you have to be doing during butchering. So it was a little bit easier when there was two of us.
Wow. So when you butchered the pigs, what did you throw away? What didn't you keep?
I didn't throw away anything. Well, okay. So we did technically. They came to us, our friends had taken out the intestines. So we got all the organs and glands, and then they had taken out the intestines. Only because
Naomi said in her episode with the Slovak that they use everything but the toenails.
Yeah. And like she said, I listened to her too. And she said, well, obviously I listened to her, but she said that they sometimes do and they sometimes don't save the intestines. And for us, since our friends did the slaughter while we weren't there, they would have had to clean the intestines and send them back with us. And I didn't want to ask them to do that. So
I get that.
So the next time we'll be able to do that.
Wow. So you've got a freezer full of it.
Yes. I was cleaning it out the other day and posting pictures in my Instagram stories. And I was surprised. I never know, I guess, what people will be interested in posting about. And when I posted about sorting our books, I got like a million messages from that, which was so cool. I was like, I didn't know everybody was so interested in books. And then when I cleaned out the freezer, I got a lot of messages about that too. So that was fun. I love that.
I've only got 3 drawers in my freezer, so you can't really clean it out. It's just, there's no like hidden corners that you don't know about.
You have 3 drawers. I have 3 freezers.
Yeah, exactly.
Not counting the ones on the fridge freezers.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Okay, so let's before we take up the whole episode, just chatting about what we've been doing recently.
This turned into like a KTC on the regular podcast.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to talk about, and we've had a lot of questions about, or I definitely have, and you said we should, why don't we just make this an episode, was cooking for a big family, because as we've definitely talked about, it's different than cooking for a smaller family. Now, I do not myself qualify as cooking for a big family. I only have 3 kids so far.
What's a big family then? What are we defining as a big family?
I don't know. My dad always says 5 kids is a starter family. Says that's a starter pack. Then it gets serious after that. I think in the US, I would say people don't give you side eye until you hit 5. You can get away with 4 and people still consider you quite a normal family. By the time you hit 5, you start getting lots of weird invasive questions. So that's probably the breaking point.
I don't know if it's the same here in Europe. My sister has 3 children and I consider that a big family because I've only got 1, Gabriel. But I think maybe 4 would be what I would consider a big family here. So
Mhm.
perhaps we're just kind of a bit behind you. 5 would be like a
Yeah.
huge, not a starter pack, like a huge family in my
Yeah.
book.
I think 2 is pretty average over here. 3 is quite normal. 4 is not as common, but frequently seen. And then the circles that I run in, anywhere from 5 to 15 is not considered
Gosh.
super crazy. So I grew up, I'm the second oldest. So I was at fairly close to the top of the pack, which means that I experienced the full experience of having a big family. My youngest sister um, is still in high school. Well, she's homeschooled, so homeschool, high school, whatever you call that. I I think she is 17. Um,
Okay.
so we've got a range. I'm
And what
34.
your older is you've got an older brother or
I have
sister, did you
I have
say?
one older sister.
And how
Um,
old's she?
well, we're all 2 years apart, so she'd be 34. She'd be 36,
So
I
she's
think.
36. So you got 36 to 17.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And like my little sister, it's fun when you have a big family. I also feel like there's lots of things you see in a big family dynamic wise that literally don't, just like, this is going to be a weird way to explain it, but remember how you said you made the booza and then you made it over and over and over, and then you found that it got too alcoholic, but you only knew that because you were doing it. That dynamic wouldn't have been known to anybody who wasn't doing it over and over and over, right? And so I feel like in a big family, there's dynamics that exist that I feel like are probably like intuitive to nature, but they don't exist outside. For instance, my little sister, so my mom obviously at some point stopped having kids, and my little sister was 4 when I got married and 7 when my first child was born.
That's just amazing that there would be a young child around still when you were giving birth. I mean, that's not something that I would be in my world, because
everybody's moved on,
it just wouldn't.
right?
Yeah,
Because
people have moved
we
on.
all move in fairly the same cohort. But what happens then is, although my mom stopped having younger children, then I started. So she still has the experience of holding a baby, taking care of a baby, and she has said to me before, and my mom and I have observed many times that the dynamic is that she is more like a sibling to my kids than anything else. The way they interact, they would fight sometimes, they would play, they would fight, they would play, like, it's very interesting. And then even though I grew up seeing my mom nursing babies on the couch every day pretty much of my life, then my little sister was the tail end, so she didn't see that. But almost immediately, I picked up the chain. And so she saw me sitting on the couch nursing the babies. So in an interesting way, the cycle, the exposure to all the ages and the stages of life and growth continues unbroken. Whereas I see a lot of kids, or a lot of women, I should say, my age, say, I've never seen somebody breastfeed a child. I've never seen a child be born. I've never held an infant. I didn't know 2-year-olds did that. I had no idea that at 4 years old, a child could do that, because they've literally never been exposed to it. So,
yeah, I mean, I would be the same. That's what I would have said. I mean, there was me and my sister growing up. And then my sister had children before me, but I wasn't around her that much. And so when I came to have Gabriel, I'd never seen anyone giving birth in real life.
Right.
And when I chose to elect for a home birth, I'd never experienced it at all. I went into it, with no first-hand experience of that at all.
Right.
I think what you're saying, it's amazing that it must normalize so many things,
I think it does,
in a woman's life. Just like you said, the breastfeeding, the different stages of life, the different periods that we go through as women.
And what morning sickness looks like in your mom, and like how much she needs to rest after baby.
I didn't know any of
And
that. I
it's
didn't know
all
any of
very
that.
fascinating.
And then I didn't have that confidence, or that confidence wasn't instilled in me to then for me to approach my own birth, my own pregnancy, and
Right.
my own feeding of Gabriel when Gabriel was young. Rob and I were literally learning just between us two what to do, because I'd never seen it.
Yeah.
And that confidence that having that around you must instill in your bones to be able to then go and have your family and deal
Totally.
with the things that come up is incredible, I think.
I hear a lot of parents say, and there's jokes about it and things like that all the time, you know, we had a baby and then they're just going to let us go home with it, like joking,
Yeah.
oh, I've got no idea what to do with this infant, and um for Gary that was more similar because he said he'd never really held an infant until we had our own. But I grew up, I mean, I honestly don't think there was a day of my life after like the very, very young years that there wasn't like a baby on my hip at some point during the day. And it like, I don't know, it's very normal. And I never thought I was always like, what do people mean? Like, why are they sending us home with this baby? And it wasn't until I realized, well, they've never been around a baby.
And this
It's
must
like,
feed into postnatal problems for women and postnatal
probably
depression, I
it
think,
has
because
to, it has
I
to.
mean, when I given birth, it was a complete and utter shock to me. I
Mm.
mean, I think for any mother, becoming a mother for the first
Well,
time
yes.
is,
Yeah.
but for me, because I wasn't party to that world before then, I went through a huge kind of post shock.
Oh,
And so many women go into postnatal depression. You think
yeah.
if that had been around them as just a given for many, many, many years before they'd had a baby, and that was still around them with a mother who's had a young child and was in their life, then I can imagine that there wouldn't be so much postnatal depression as there is now.
We definitely need to have a conversation about pregnancy and the postpartum because I have lots of
Mm,
thoughts.
excellent.
So
Okay,
we were,
we'll put that on the list.
yes, please do. Actually, it is something I've been getting asked about a lot because I'm a doula. So naturally,
Mm,
I like to move in the world of birth. So I get asked about birth nutrition a lot. So,
mm,
um, anyways, we were homeschooled. We had all our schooling was done at home, and my mom actually never set out with the intention of doing that. It was just that my older sister wanted to learn to read, and my mom thought, but she's not ready for school yet. But she figured, I guess I'll teach her how to read, and then we just kept on doing that. So we um we were all trained from a really young age to do work around the house. That's another thing that I see. And
mhm.
I my mom says that 4 is actually the number where having a lot of kids starts to get easier because she said anytime up before 4, you think you can do everything and you really stretch yourself to the limit, the breaking point even to do it all. And after 4, you realize you can't and you give in and you have to
Yeah.
really um, you know, utilize crew resource management skills.
Mm,
And she was really good about training us. I mean, we all left the home, boys and girls, with skills in cooking and cleaning and the homemaking arts, I guess you would say.
mm,
And that has proven quite useful for all of us as adults. And one of my earliest memories is cooking with mom. I remember where we were standing, and I was so short that I couldn't see the top of the counter. So I must have been fairly young, but we were making cornbread. I still remember that. And
mhm.
I was so proud when dad ate it at dinner and was like, this is so good. I was like, yes. We all kind of had our things that we gravitated towards, and I always gravitated towards cooking. So I was trying to remember
Mhm.
when exactly it started, but I would say by about 13, probably I was doing pretty much all the cooking for the family. And that was also where I got my love of gardening. And my parents usually had a garden, and then after a while, they stopped doing that. So I took it on as a project for myself and told mom it was school and took a bunch of pictures and recorded stuff so that I could count it for
Mhm.
credits. And that was also where I taught myself how to can and told mom that was school too. And took notes and took
Nice.
pictures so that I could count it for credits. And um, I should say here, since if it is a big family, food cooking episode. I'll probably have some listeners who homeschool. I was a terrible student in terms of I didn't want to do anything that I was told to do. It was a terrible way to live your life. But my mom was actually really good about it. And she found where I don't know. What I'm trying to say is I completed all the required credits for high school in our state and above and beyond, and did great in college in terms of, I had a 4.0 GPA, including hard sciences on everything I did. But I took tons of time off, as you would say, in high school, because I literally was just like, all I wanted to do was can stuff and garden and write books about ancient Egypt and stay up all night writing novel after novel after novel. So I guess what I want to say is, if you are worried about your child, it's probably going to be okay. All right. So, and that's not all to say how smart I was in terms of college. That's just to say how low the bar is in college. So I guess all this in conclusion to say, I've been cooking for a lot of people for a long time. There we go. All right.
Yeah. I mean, how did you cook for a family that big, age 13? That is incredible.
Well, I don't know. It just seemed perfectly normal. You'd make bigger batches of everything. And I really resonated with what one of the women said in Chewing the Fat, which I'm sure you and I will be referencing for the rest of our lives, where she said, I don't remember what the recipes were. We just cooked food. And that is how I feel about so many things. I wasn't always making recipes per se. I just cooked the food we had and we ate it. Yeah. And my mom just shopped for what she shopped for, and she didn't particularly say to me, what ingredients do you want? And it never crossed my mind to ask her. And I remember my dad saying one time, we were leaving church, and he was like, Andrea, what's going to be for lunch or whatever? And I was like, I don't know. I'll have to see when I get there. Because sometimes, when you get to the end of the grocery, like we never ran out of food or were low on food, but sometimes you'd be like, oh, now there's no more sour cream and now there's no more cheese. You just have like all the boring ingredients left. But my dad would always say, Andrea can make something out of nothing. It's amazing. Right. So I was always having to be very creative in what I came up with, because it was just, you have what you have and you got to make it into something. Yeah. So we just cooked the food and then we ate it. So when I was trying to think, Allison, about how I wanted to approach the topic of cooking for a big family, at first I just had a bunch of scattered thoughts all over the page. And then I started trying to sort them. And then I started trying to think about them in a visual way, because that's just how I think. So I pictured first, what is your widest scope of influence? And I don't mean your influence out. I mean the influence in. So your widest scope of influence, starting with, the actual region where you live and your territory, as I called it in my mind, all the way down to your heart and like inside of your mind. And even though really nothing happens without the heart part, I'm going to start on the outer ring and work my way in. Sound good?
Okay. Yeah. All
right.
I'm ready.
Just stop the train anytime you have a question. I will. Once it leaves the station, I don't know what's going to happen. Okay. So first you have your territory. This is your actual range. So where you live, I will literally say that where you live geographically can influence the size of your family. And what I mean is, it is hard to have a big family in a high rise in New York. I know people who have done it, and they have said that all they want to do is get out of there because it doesn't serve the size of family. It is great for a couple, but for a big family, it just works better to have more room. Not every family has a ton of room. I've known people with 8 kids who live in like a condo, 800 square feet, and they made it happen, but they eventually moved out to a farm. But they obviously wanted to move to a farm because it supported the way they wanted to live. Some things tend to go hand in hand with big families. Not always, definitely not always, but certainly enough to be a notable trend. And one is big families tends to be comorbid. Don't know if that's the right word. There's got to be a better word for that. With homeschool, those tend to go together.
Yeah.
And also big families often tend to coexist, I'll say, with bigger pieces of property. That is certainly not the way it has been historically, as we noted from Chewing the Fat, where she's again, where she's we're gonna have to start taking shots for that, shots of lard, where she said that they had like 6 girls in one room and 5 boys in the other, you know.
Yeah.
But that being said, even in those older books, you'll notice, or older memories, you'll notice that the bigger families tended to thrive on farms. Whereas if you notice a lot of the city families, they said there was 2 of them or 1 of them or 3 of them.
Yeah.
Obviously they didn't have the same, I don't know if you want to even say options.
And I think living on the land and the homeschooling thing go,
Yeah.
as you said, go closely together, because if you're on the land, there's a lot of work to do and you're outside all the time, and the kids are doing that, and it's important for them to do that. And that is an education, and therefore it naturally fits with them being around, not with them being somewhere else.
And I'm not saying that you have to have a lot of property to have a lot of kids. I'm just saying cooking for a big family often can work well with having land, because of the fact that you'll be able to produce more of your own resources when you have more room. So cooking for a big family often happens that way. You also, your territories can include your farm network. And if you want to cook an ancestral diet for a big family, you need to have a farm network. You need to know the farmers. If your kids are old enough, they should definitely be volunteering on the farms. I have volunteered on and worked on different farms, and will probably always do that, because for one, you learn a lot when you work for another farmer, and sometimes you can do work swaps for food, which I've done a lot of. It was like basically how I fed our family when we lived in Virginia. But also aside from learning and then swapping, you're also building a relationship with the farmer. So I'm not necessarily saying work 1 hour for 3 pounds of food. I'm saying I went out, I showed up and I helped, we dug trenches during the floods, whatever. And then that summer, who's the farmer going to think of when she has a bumper crop of tomatoes and they're going to spoil? She's going to call you. And I'm not saying that, we do something in order to get something, but there is this social contract where we kind of reciprocate each other, generally speaking. And it's a literal win-win contract. Everybody wins in a contract like that. So just showing up and helping people. I cannot count the infusions that our household has had of, you name whatever it is, just by showing up and being present for people as a friend and as a helper. Another thing you can do that would involve your region is support bills in government, literally in government. There's ways you can vote that will make your food more or less affordable. When small farms, and they are constantly being choked out and put the crimps put on them and thumb screws hammered down, it gets harder and harder to get your food to market at an affordable price. So farmers will probably tell you, if you ask them, hey, is there any bills I should be aware of lately? Like, what's being passed in the house that I need to be aware of, or what's going on in our local government? And they'll tell you. So that's your big picture kind of scope, the territory. Then we're going to come a little bit closer, and I'm going to talk about the voices. So this is who you're listening to. I'm just going to say right out of the gate that when you have a big family, people think they have all kinds of a right to talk to you about your sex life, your intimacy, the planet, the climate, the environment. Like, they will say all kinds of things to you that you're like, really? And in front of your kids too. So, so the voices that you allow to speak into your life when you have a big family matters a lot. And I'm including that in a conversation about food because there is no part of life that is disconnected from the table. So, in my philosophy, I would see children as a blessing. That is actually not really true. The world at large, weirdly, doesn't make sense.
I
Um,
agree.
there's not a lot of there's not a lot of oh, I don't know what the right word is. There's not a lot of grace given. And I hear the same arguments, just like when people say there's too many cows, that's going to kill the climate, get rid of all the cows.
Mm,
And then hear the same argument. There's too many children, get rid of the children.
mm.
Maybe it's more the way we're living and less, the cows. So communicate with other big families. You want to have other big families in your life. If you're the only big family that can be a little bit isolating. But when you know other big families, there's wisdom that comes with that. Like I was talking about how, my little sister was 4 when I got married, and then 7 when I had my first child. And so there's different dynamics that exist that nobody outside of somebody else in a big family is going to be able to understand. And then in sibling order, like there's, the birth order psychology and stuff. There's unique dynamics within a big family that literally don't exist outside of a big family. Like the fact that you can have 2 or 3 generations within one set of siblings. It was like, oh yeah, that's where that cutoff was for that. And oh, those
Mm.
kids don't know anything about those movies because they like that DVD was broken when they were little. So, like there's just funny, weird little things that only exist in a big family. So if you have other big families you can talk to, it's really supportive. Also, other
I think
moms of
that's wise wisdom for really anything that that is part of your life that
mhm.
you could do with support on.
Yeah.
For example, here, we're an English family in Italy, and
Uh-huh.
there are things that are different for us, very, very different,
Right.
because we're an English speaking family in Italy. And therefore, for us to go and find other English speaking families in Italy, as well as having Italian speaking family friends as well,
Uh-huh.
we get that support and knowledge of someone who understands, yeah, it's like that for me too.
Mhm.
And, there's a myriad different things that everyone listening to this has that's particular about them and their situation. And going and finding people who understand and you can
Right.
swap and support and share and get support and comfort with
Mhm.
is so important. So yeah, I think that's really
Definitely.
relevant in what we're talking, but really relevant for literally everyone's listening
Yeah.
who will have something like that where they could go and find community.
I think you could take the word big family out and put in anything you want, and pretty much everything
Yeah.
I'm saying would apply to like a lot of different things. So when you talk to moms with a lot of kids, you get a lot of wisdom that you're not going to get um, in terms of applying to a big family. I'm not saying a mom with only one child doesn't have wisdom. I'm saying a mom with one child, she could give you input on things for 8 kids, but hearing it from a mom with 8 kids will probably be
Mm,
more like constructive, if that
mm,
makes sense. So,
yeah.
like I asked a mom friend I've known my whole life, and she has 12 kids. She's the one who taught me how to make pozole. We talked about that a long time ago.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I said, "How do you cook for such a big family all the time, every day?" And you go to her house, doesn't matter what time of day, there will be delicious food prepared for you. And she said, well, one strategy that she's used her whole life that her mom taught her, and I told you she grew up in Mexico. She said,
Excuse
oh, there he
Gabriel,
is.
who's just come home with the bell.
That's so cute.
Yeah, he stopped.
She
Amazing.
said, oh, in the beginning of the week, cook a huge batch of beans and then use
Mm,
them all week long. So you have some
yep.
beans to throw into a noodle dish. You have some beans to mash and cook as refried beans for burritos. You have some beans to cook, refried beans and eggs for breakfast. And so that was a great strategy that we've used. Just having a huge batch of beans cooked, whatever kind you like, and just kind of scattering it throughout the week as an extra protein. And again, I recognize it's kind of funny. I'm saying this, I only have 3 kids, but at
Oh,
the
I
same
do that
time.
for us, and I only have one kid. I've
Yeah.
cooked loads of lentils up, and then we just use them in the week.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
imagine if I had more kids, I would just be doing
Yeah.
more lentils. So it makes
Hmm.
complete sense.
Yeah, you just have to think scale. And you're cooking on a like industrial level when you have a lot of kids,
Mm,
but your help scales too, unless you have octuplets or something like that. But your help
mhm.
scales with you. And that was something my mom said, when I was a teenager and I was cooking. And then my mom said, there was at one point, I don't remember, like 6 teenagers in the house, I forget. And my mom said people always said to her, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh, you poor thing." And she's like, "What are you talking about? I don't cook. I don't clean. I don't do the laundry. Like, I love my life." She said, she goes, but they didn't see their teens for like their entire childhood. They saw them in the evening after school. And that was just telling them to do homework and go to bed. But they weren't really
Mm.
raising them in the sense that and I'm not trying to come off as like judgmental. I'm just saying, like, just like hours added up were less at home, whereas my mom was literally beside us every day of our life, teaching us how to scrub, teaching us how to mop, teaching us how to do laundry or whatever. And we of course had assigned chores, and then, not saying we were always great about it, but we were doing them. And then by the time we were teenagers, we were doing them better. Um, and so it paid off for her. All that time training us really paid off. So you have more people in the house, but you also have more hands helping, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And it is a little hard if you have a lot of them really close together and there's a batch of twins and they're all really small. That's definitely something different. And I can't really speak into that situation, but um let's see.
Hmm.
So something else to consider with the voices, going
Hmm.
back to the territory thing where I talked about like living in a high-rise in New York, you would feel frustrated and you would feel like it was hard to have 5 kids if you lived with them in a 2-bedroom apartment in New York. And you'd feel like it was ungodly expensive because you'd be eating food shipped into the city or restaurant food every
Yeah.
single day. But if you live in the country where, like, my kids are outside most of the day and they do have chores, and I'm not saying they always do them again, but I'm training them daily, and their help offsets, so I tell them all the time, we have this phrase like, "What are you doing to contribute to the household right now?" So maybe your chore is done, but we're just working on the household. So what are you doing? Well, I'm going to bring in new, you know I don't know, you name it, like take out the trash or something.
Hmm.
um so it many hands make light work applies here. Your mentors, there's books and podcasts that kind of support having a big family, the philosophy and the attitudes surrounding it. I would also always recommend Charlotte Mason, um, just because I heard somebody say once, you always know who the Charlotte Mason moms are because they walk into a room and they get down on like eye level with a child and talk to them like a
Hmm.
person. And I was like, that's such a beautiful way of saying it. But Charlotte Mason had a way of reminding us that children are humans also, and valuable and should be listened to, not allowed to control the household, but acknowledged. In the same way, you don't really want any one person in the household to, you know, domineer it, but you want them
Hmm.
all to contribute and be heard within the household. Um,
So if people don't know who Charlotte Mason is or want to dig into her work more,
mhm.
where do they go to find her? Where did you go to find
Well,
her and learn from
if
her?
they want a book, I would say grab For the Children's Sake. That's a good
Okay.
shorter version. Charlotte Mason also wrote books, and well, she gave talks and wrote books, and they were combined into books. So you could read any one of her volumes. There's 6, I think.
Okay.
And I have a I have a fan page for Charlotte Mason, my Charlotte Mason commonplace, which I haven't posted on since June of last year, but so I need to post again. But I just put quotes from her books up there.
Yeah, I remember seeing those coming up. I can't believe you haven't posted since June. It seems like
Yeah.
some of the quotes have
Yeah.
stuck in my head for a long time then.
They do get stuck in your head. I will start posting on them again soon, but I have it on my calendar and I'm not rushing myself. But she has so many quotes. Okay, I just grabbed the book. I actually brought the book down with me because I thought I'll share a quote from Charlotte Mason. And I just, I just let it fall open, and it opened to this one, which I love. And it applies to us now more so. I don't know. She wrote this in the Victorian era, so it still applies. She says, in this time of extraordinary pressure, educational and social, perhaps a mother's first duty to her children is to secure for them a quiet growing time, a full 6 years of passive, receptive life, the waking part of it spent for the most part out in the fresh air. I love that. So finding people who support the way you want to live. Just looking at my notes to make sure I didn't leave anything off of there. Okay, so then the next sort of ring, so you've got the territory, the big outside territory, you've got all these voices feeding in, and then within there I have the next layer, which I call the home. This is your actual physical, literal dwelling, not the philosophical, metaphysical home, but the physical dwelling can be made more or less to support your goals of eating ancestral and having a large family. So drawers, shelves, pantry, like these are the kinds of things I'm talking about.
I know you've got super organization in your house. So you're going to tell us some of your wonderful kind of methods in your own kitchen.
No, I'm actually going to tell you the methods that I used before I had a big house, because they're probably more applicable to. So this is the biggest house I've ever lived in. I've never had this much room. I've never had this much convenience, I guess we'll say. So I will start by saying the myth that is always said, which is, I can't afford to have more children, right? And the reason I say myth is simply because it's not an actual fact of being able to afford children 99% of the time. Let's just say it's a preference of certain conveniences or ways of life. So what I want to unpack that to say, which is not to say everybody needs to run out and have 20 kids. What I'm trying to say there is the people that I know who have bigger families have almost always opted for a lower income in terms of the net total that would go on your taxes, more production within the home. So less cash income, but production within the home. And often, not always, but often one of the parents staying home, not working outside the home, and being sort of the primary conduit of that production. And the driver of the training of the staff, which is the children. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I hear people with what I would consider, and for statistical purposes in the US, to be a large income, say, oh my gosh, we couldn't afford to have more than 2 children. Because they're saying that in the sense that somebody will say to you, oh my goodness, I couldn't afford to eat pate every week. And you're like, well, I don't buy pate. I walk to a farm, and I get it because of a relationship with a farmer. It is given to me. I come home and I peel off the membrane and I wash it and I make the pate, so you're saying, well, I can't afford pate either, but I value it and I value its
Yeah.
input into my life. So I make it happen. And
Yeah.
so I see with a lot of big families, well, we value what children bring to our life and what we see as their role in the world, their purpose in the world. And so we choose not to push a button and get DoorDash restaurant meals delivered, but we make a homeschool project out of raising chickens or something. Like it's just a preference of how you want to spend your time. It's not
I agree. And that
necessarily
is true for so many things
yeah.
that,
So many things. So many things.
we don't have a massive income here, but we eat the food from the farms around us, and we spend a large percentage of our income on food, like extremely large, because we value what that brings to us, and we choose that over other things that other people might spend their money on,
Right.
because we completely value and love what it brings to us. And I think life becomes a lot easier when we're super clear on what we value, and we take steps to bring it to life, to bring it into fruition, because then we're getting the things that we really totally believe in, and we just drop the things that aren't important to us. We know what's not important, and then we don't do it. So I really believe that values and priority are a bigger influence on this idea of what we can afford and what we can't. That's the question we should be asking, not about the details of how much these things cost and whether we want all this stuff.
Exactly.
We can look at our lives in a different way through what we value. Yeah. Completely.
So
carry on.
That I'm trying not to, I'm really not ranting, am I? Like, I'm not saying,
No.
I don't feel or think that everybody has to have a bajillion kids or something. I get asked these questions a lot, so I'm trying to answer them. Okay. So your home. The other thing I hear people say, and this is going to be the same thing Allison just applied to another thing, is I don't have the room. And I've seen your kitchen and I know that they're not telling the truth. Allison truly doesn't have room. How many people would live in that house and say, ooh, well, you can't really cook in this house, so we don't.
Yeah.
A lot of people would say that.
Yeah.
They would say, oh, you can cook like bachelor pad style food in here, but that's about it. Well, okay, but I'm almost loath to post pictures of how our food storage is now, because I don't want to give a false impression that you need to have this. We have never, ever had shelves like this. We have never had space to stack things like this and line it up like this. We've just never had that. It's always been, lined up in the spare bedroom or, beside the bed, along the bed, under the bed, over the washing machine, like in closets, everywhere, stacked on the deck, whatever. We've had freezers on the deck, under tarps, in the rain. Like we have just never had the square footage of the garage in this house is more than the square footage of our last house, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Wow.
So this is just not. This is not normal for us. And so I don't want somebody to think that this is how it has to be in order to do this. I again would say, again, with the large families tend to be people who have opted for a lower income dollar wise in order to have a bigger family and produce more within the home. I would also say people who produce and store food at home in order to, save money, usually have less room than anybody else. Like the people who have said to me, I don't have room, they have gigantic houses. What they're trying to say is, I don't want to see crates of pickles. That's what they're saying.
Don't want to be stepping over them.
Right. And I don't want to be stepping over them either, but that's what they're saying. I have a spare room full of toys. It's called a toy room. I don't want to put bins of sawdust with sweet potatoes in there. Like,
Mm.
well, okay. So again, it's not really a fact. It's just a preference, which if you want a toy room, have a toy room. If you don't want to store sweet potatoes, don't store sweet potatoes. Like, I really don't care what you want to do. Just don't fall victim to the myth that that's a fact, that you don't have the room. I
Mm.
guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
um, I definitely, like, again, I'm not saying anybody has to store food. I'm just saying maybe you desperately want to store food, but you never considered the fact that you could have crates of it as decor.
Yeah.
So,
No,
so
I've seen Instagram pictures of the most beautiful setups of shelves with
yeah,
ferments and preserves and things on it. And I mean, I literally look at it and think, oh my gosh, I would just be loved to looking at that.
wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And I'll also say I've seen a ton of Instagram reels and pictures. People send them to me all the time of pantries, and they're like, OMG, bulk pantry storage. And
Mm.
like, I have twice as much of that lined up in my hallway right now.
Mm.
That's not even when you get, that's before you even get to the food storage. And no, I'm not trying
Yeah.
to say like, yay me, I have so much food. What I'm trying to say is it's not really bulk. And the
Yeah.
people who really have bulk storage, they ain't posting the pictures online because they're not pretty. They're like,
Yeah.
well, nobody wants to see this. There's like lines and lines and lines of jars, and they're in
Yeah.
cardboard boxes with masking tape that says
Mm.
tomato 2021, tomato 2021, tomato 2021,
Mm.
and that's how we have it most of the time. And that's how it's pretty much always been for me. I'm not saying that you don't want to make it beautiful. Obviously, I have dreams and goals to make everything look nice. And I will be working out there again this week because I figure we might as well make it into a showpiece if we have it. It's the most expensive decorations we have is bags of oatmeal. So what I am saying is, practically speaking, it's probably not usually going to look like those white painted, brightly lit, super organized Instagram pictures.
Mm.
And if you have a big family, you almost definitely will be storing food because we have a family of 5 people, not 5 kids, 5 people. And I
Mm.
don't know how people keep buying these teeny tiny little containers at the grocery store. For one, plastic trash. But the other is, holy cow, it's expensive. Like,
Yeah.
wow, 50 pounds of oatmeal costs about the same as 2 pounds of oatmeal at the grocery store.
Yeah. Completely.
Literally. So with a big family, you almost definitely will be storing food in bulk. And if you are a big family, you also, I don't remember what category this is supposed to go in, but I was going to say another tip that I got from the mom with lots of kids, and this is something I have done my whole life, is always say yes. I came up with that tip for myself, but she said also ask. So what I
Mm.
mean by that is I always say yes. If somebody says, "Hey Andrea, I have some," and I say yes. I don't
Okay.
get into the details. I examine it more closely after the fact. And every once in a while, this is not something that we can utilize for ourselves. But because I always say yes, I'm the first person they call. I have probably been given thousands of dollars, more than that, thousands of dollars
So
worth
you don't mean just
in,
food, you mean kind of like household objects and kitchen
well, not,
equipment
okay,
and all
not
of that stuff.
necessarily everything. Well, I don't know. People don't really offer me lots of other things. Every once in a while they do, but, specifically saying with food, I would always say yes. Well, if somebody says books too, I
Mm.
also always say yes because I've gotten some
Mhm.
boxes that I'm like, this looks like a bunch of twaddle, and then I dig into it and I'm like, what? Bullfinch's mythology? Yes, please. So
Mm.
the food thing, I remember a friend saying in Virginia, Andrea, you always get so much free food. How do you do it? Like, people are always giving you free food. I was like, I don't know, but it just finds me. I had a friend of a friend of a friend, somebody I don't even know, called me and they're like, "Hey, I'm moving to Texas." She had 8 kids and she had a basement full of organic legumes, buckets and buckets and buckets and buckets, and bags of grain in refrigerators. And um, I took it all, and then I turned around and shared it with another family. So we didn't just keep it all for ourselves. And we're still eating those beans.
Wow.
Like there was Swedish red beans, there was pinto beans, black beans, chickpeas, 3 5-gallon buckets of chickpeas. There was navy beans, lentils, green peas, like rice, blue
Gosh.
corn, yellow corn. So much stuff. And just, I guess, because somebody knew that Andrea would probably take it. And it was all organic, by the way, from the same place where I buy from Azure. It was all organic from Azure, but she couldn't take it on the move. So, and then she also, because I was there anyways, she was like, do you want all these antique dishes and meat grinders? And I was like, yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So always say yes. And then what the friend with 12 kids said was also ask, like, if you drive past a house with, 12 apple trees in front and then there's just apples all over the ground, go to the door and ask, do you care if we pick up the windfall apples? And she was like, we have filled our 15-passenger van, gone home and made applesauce, 400 quarts for free, basically, but you had to put the effort into it. But because you had 10 kids helping you, it wasn't so bad. And so by saying yes and by asking, there's quite a lot that you can, I mean, one time I was walking on the boardwalk in Virginia and there was like a race, like people do like 5Ks or whatever. And they had bins of bananas and oranges. And so I just asked, there was somebody there who looked official, and I was like, everybody was gone. So I was like, can I take these? And she was like, sure, we're just going to throw them away. And I was like, sweet. So then it's fruit. So I instantly texted everybody I knew and I was like, come to my house and get oranges and bananas. And people showed up and they were like, yes, please. Thank you. And all kinds of families were benefiting. And I froze bags and bags. I dried bags, and we literally just used up like the last bag of dried bananas after we moved to this house. So the next year, I knew the race was coming and I went out like 4 a.m. and I was like, hey, when you guys are done, do you care if I like? And they're like, yeah, that'd be great. Just come pick up all the leftovers. I was like, sweet.
Well, then they don't have to take them away.
Exactly. Yeah. They would all go in the landfill. So, because they cut the oranges in half and they cut the bananas in half. So it's literally all trash once they're done. So I don't know, just I asked, they said yes. And it benefited a ton of us. So anyways, I don't know where I got. How long has this been? 2 hours?
Where you're on your list.
Okay.
No,
so,
I think I'm going to have to try and keep your train on track, I think, because we're over the hour.
We're winding down. We've got the brakes on. Okay. But do what you can to your space to make it amenable to having a big family. Build shelves, sort boxes, label things. I'm very big on labeling. Keep pantry lists if you can. Raise animals, great homeschool project if you can. Utilize your freezers, prep food if you can, because just cooking for a big family, if you've got, 20 pounds of cooked ground beef or gallon bags of chopped peppers and chopped onions and things, you can produce meals at speed a little bit better. A weekly plan, the homesteading family talked about this. I'll link them. They have 9 kids and they're really big on their YouTube channel. They don't really post on their podcast and they don't really do much on Instagram, but their YouTube is fantastic. And she has lots of strategies for working with a big family, including using jurisdictions for chores, which we utilize that ever since I heard her say that. And also weekly planning. So just planning out a loose, 7 days of dinners, just so you kind of know what to get out of the freezer and
do you
and
do
use
that?
up. Yes. Do you remember the conversation we had with Lexi? It's on the Patreon where we talked about meal planning.
Feed, yeah.
And Lexi's like, and you said this too, you're like, I think you do a little more meal planning than you think. My meal planning is just not like 3 days or 3 meals and snacks written out. It's a little more loose. Like, okay, we've got pork bones, we've got a rump roast, we've got, and then I kind of,
what could I do?
I kind of pull them out of the freezer and move them around as suits the day. But it does, our family is still small enough that I could can get away with being lazy in my planning. But once you hit 4 kids plus, it's very hard to get away without planning, because for an entire like casserole dish is one meal and it's gone. It's not like there's leftovers or something. And so you can't always just wing it. That's where food gets expensive, is having to wing it, because then you're relying on somebody else to do the processing. And
so when you were 13 and cooking for your family, were you planning the meals for the week then?
I don't really, I sometimes I would write them out on a board. I was really obsessed with the idea of having a restaurant. So whenever we sat down to eat, my dad would say, and he still says, Andrea's Elegant Restaurant. So like I wrote that on a paper and hung it on the back door. I was very into this idea. And so I would write a menu because it felt legit,
Okay.
But I wasn't really a meal planner per se.
You weren't planning. Okay.
Yeah, because you didn't know what you're going to have from day to day. Sometimes this was in the fridge and then somebody ate it. So that happened. But it does help, because you got to get stuff out of the freezer. And my mom was ordering from Azure back then. She was, I guess, an early adopter. So we always had like bags of wheat lined up in the kitchen, and we had to grind the wheat and whatever. So, okay, I'm going to transition right into the last one, which is the kitchen. Okay. So the home was really hard for me to separate what went under home to kitchen. So I just tried to think big structural things outside of the home that support your goal. But within the kitchen, this is more specific. Yeah, the meal planning, do write down. I also write like a punch list on the wall. I have a whiteboard hanging up. Lexi talks about her index card, and she's got me really obsessed with doing that, where she just writes out her 3 meals for the day the night before, because that does give you time to yank anything out of the freezer that you need. But without it is a little bit hard to plan way far in advance, because suddenly you have to drive into town and pick up a load of propane or something. And so now you're not going to be here. So you can't do that heavy prep meal, and you have to have something you can throw in easy. So planning in 24-hour cycles, I guess, works the best for me. But in your kitchen, you want to have cookbooks that support the way you eat. And I'll just say right now, A Cabin Full of Food, which I've mentioned before, is probably made for big families. So Nourishing Traditions is another one that I recommend for big families. It's all very conducive to scaling up and down. Nourishing Traditions for kids, because if we aren't teaching our kids how to cook, what are we doing? Like, what are we thinking? Isn't that not what they lament more than anything in Chewing the Fat, is that the younger generations don't know how to prepare the foods, and they don't want to.
They don't want to know. Yeah.
The Ball, I get asked a lot, what do I use for canning? I would say the Ball Blue Book and the Ball Home Preserving Book probably use the most, but I have lots of
wonderful.
old
We'll put all
books.
these in the show notes, so
I'll
people
put
can
them
go
on the show
find them.
notes. Radical Homemaking for your everything. And another tip that came from the mom with 12 kids, and my mom never explicitly said this to me, but she implicitly demonstrated this, because I can testify that it's true. So both these moms would say, and this is probably the hardest thing, but it will pay off. And I know, Allison, from what you've said, that this is what you do too. When the child asks to help, never say no. That is so hard. That is so hard sometimes.
When there's a million things to do.
Yes.
And you wanted to get something done in 2 minutes, and it's now going to take you 20 minutes.
But I do remember, wasn't it C.S. Lewis who said, the children aren't the distraction from the important work. They are the important work. And so I just, like, that will flash up before my eyes, and I'll suck that heavy sigh back into my face and be like, sure, go grab a chair and stand up here and sprinkle flour everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Crack some eggs over the floor, put the flour everywhere.
The children will refine you. You will instantly see how much patience you don't have, and you will learn. So, I guess it's weird. This whole conversation is about cooking for a big family, and I don't have that much to say about the kitchen, but, I guess I would say primarily everything outside everything we just said, your lifestyle is supporting what happens in the kitchen. And
Yeah.
without those things happening, it is kind of hard to
Yeah.
make the kitchen function well. And I would say the most important thing, I was trying to think of what was like the top thing I would say for the kitchen, is that take any product or food you like, and the more you can reverse engineer it and remove the layers of processing that are done before that food gets to you, that eliminates cost and expense. And you then add the value to the product yourself. So like I'll say, take a bucket of milk and turn it into cheese and sour cream. You've now got two very expensive value added products, but it probably didn't cost you that much in terms of dollars. If you're cooking for a big family, almost definitely going to have to do that. And that's where you do need to spend more time processing food. And so not only like you, Allison, you do a lot of food processing at home. And then with a big family, you're going to take all that food processing you do at home and multiply it by 10. So it automatically takes more time. So this is where you must be willing to train your children and invite them into the kitchen with you when they're young and they think it's fun. Because if you wait until they're 12 and they're useful, they're not going to want to, and they're not going to think it's fun. And their hands won't be as dexterous as if you started them. Like, look at the freaking dinner Gabe made the other night that you posted on Instagram. I was like, whose child does that? Well, Allison's child does, of course, but, and look at Rafa when Aaron posted that video of Rafa cutting with the knife. And I was like, whose kid knows how to handle a knife like that? Well, Aaron's son does. Of course he does, you know? But that's not because Aaron waited until he was 12 and old enough to handle a knife. Like, he started him now, and he modeled it for him and invited him into the experience willingly, not with a heavy sigh, not with groans and telling the child what a burden he was, but willingly. So I would definitely say that is going to be the linchpin for cooking with a big family, is bringing the children in.
What we've done with Gabriel is he wants creative control over things, not just to do the
he put kiwi and cabbage. I saw that.
So when we go to the local cooperative, we let him choose and buy some veggies.
Yes.
And then he just invents something with my kind of, watching to make sure it's not going to be a disaster. And so that's why he put kiwi with cabbage. But, he will learn through putting kiwi with cabbage, whether he likes it or whether he doesn't. And I think giving him that creative control has kind of captured his imagination. And we're doing it regularly. He's doing it once a week now.
You're back to the beginning of the conversation, Allison, where you said we have to do it to learn. You could have told him, I don't know if those two will pair, but you could have also said, let's try it. And that's another thing that I love about the Charlotte Mason method, is she doesn't say, just throw caution to the wind and let Gabe mix, put raw octopus on the plate. And then she does assume that you will provide some input, which you clearly did, but she also wants you to discover, because she believes that that is truly how our brain learns and completely experiences things, which is obviously true. So I guess I had one last thing, which was the very final ring, which on my picture is so small, it's just a dot. That is your heart. And without your attitude or your heart being in the right place, every system in the world for cooking for a big family, the most organized shelves and the most beautiful meal planning will fail if your attitude is not in the right place. And
what do you mean by that?
And this, again, this is true with everything. So if you have these beautiful organized shelves and you begrudge your family the time it takes to get the can of beans down and prepare them dinner, and you slam it onto the table with bad attitude, and you tell the children what a burden they are on you, and how you put them in this world and you're going to take them out, then there will be no harmony whatsoever in the home. And And what's even the point? Better to not have children than to put a child through that kind of misery. And with business, you can have great business systems, but if your attitude and your beliefs are not in the right place, your business will probably fail. And I've seen that so many times. Like, both my parents are entrepreneurs with both their own businesses. We've talked about this before. Both of Gary's parents are entrepreneurs, both with their own businesses. Gary and I are both entrepreneurs, both with our own businesses. And you have to really, truly believe in your purpose, your business, what it's there for, and that it will succeed. Because if you don't, all those great systems, you're going to go, well, we'll try this, but it probably won't work. So here goes nothing.
And we've talked about this before, how the why is so
Yes.
important.
Yes.
Why you're doing this in the kitchen, why you want to lose weight, why you want to have a big family. Getting to understand what our values are and why we want something is the engine behind everything. The systems fall in place through, picking things up and learning, but the engine that drives this train, that's quite what we were talking about, is that passion and belief and why behind it. Totally.
The Nourishing Traditions book is not worth the paper it's printed on if you don't believe in eating that way. And what I mean is, when the rubber meets the road, you will say, screw it, I'm going to order a pizza because this is too much. And the same thing is in your home. If you don't believe in why you have, one child, two childs. I learned grammar. Yes, I did. Or, 3 children or 8 children or 10 children, whatever it is. If you don't believe in that, then when the rubber meets the road, you'll say, this is just too hard. I give up. I'm going to have a mental breakdown. I just can't handle this. It's not worth pursuing other systems. It's not worth trying to make it work. Send them to school, get them out of it just won't be worth it. And I know I don't mean send them to school in the, obviously Gabriel goes to school. What I mean is get them away from me which you don't. Yeah. That's not your mentality with that, obviously. But the attitude of just get them out of my space. And I think you would agree with this, Allison. Lexi posted something, and I'm just going to list resources in the show notes. I'm not going to say them all here because it'll be too long. So I'll just say, Lexi had posted something on her Instagram, a snippet from a book where she said, the woman said, the term nursing a child, like I said, I saw my mom sitting on the couch nursing a baby, encompasses so much more than just breastfeeding a child. And she said, better for a mother to be whole. And you and I, Allison, we're probably both as gung-ho for breastfeeding as anyone you'll ever meet. But better for a mother to be mentally whole and able to truly nurse and engage with the child than to disconnected, glazed eyes, staring out the window, not acknowledging the infant at her breast, breastfeeding. You know what I mean? Like your experience with Gabriel, which people can hear on another episode, but your experience with Gabriel and the way you fed him was not less nursing, if you know what I'm saying. The attention was given. So it's the attitude. It's not just the
I don't know.
thing.
Someone said how you do something is how you do everything, and it reminds me of that. The way that you nurse your child and the attention you give to that, it's the same as the way you prepare the food and put it on the table. It's the same. It's that kind of idea of consciously choosing how you want to experience every moment and how you want those who you love to experience every moment, rather than allowing something else to come into your life and kind of take over, whether it be kind of baggage or distractions or all the other things that life throws at us. And that's a hard thing to do. It's something that, is a lifetime's work, but that will reward so much in how we experience our life. So I totally agree that the heart, is the center, and the rest of it will work much more easily when that's in alignment with who the individual is,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know this was
Thank
going to
you.
turn into a manifesto, but that's all I have, Allison. And I'm
You
out.
should write the manifesto.
I'm done.
Okay. Well, I'm going to, all the resources you've got scribbled down on that pad there.
Yeah.
Then
You know
we
it.
will put them all in the show notes, because I know that you write the most epic show notes. If you see epic show notes in a podcast, that Andrea did those ones. Put all those links in, and then those who are listening who want support, want to go and find out anything that you've talked about, or want to know more, can go and look there.
And I'll add more.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that.
I'll add more than what I said. Yeah.
Thank you for all the wisdom that your mum passed on to you, that you're able to share with everyone in this space. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I hope I didn't step on any toes, and I hope that I only encouraged people in what their, choices are that feel right to them, and congruent with, the way they feel about the world. So I'm not again, I think I already said this like 10 times, but I'm not telling everybody they need to have a big family. I'm saying if you choose to have a big family, I support it.
Then this is where you can get support. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Allison. Well, until next time then.
Okay. We'll sign out then. Thanks very much, Andrea. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Allison's at Ancestral_kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration, and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.